We wanted to have a little bit of a chat. I know that today's focus was talking a little bit about homeschool and homeschool parents, and why the Academy has been so successful helping homeschool parents in their quest to bring math to young minds. I think it's important for everyone to know, hey, at what grade does the Academy start, and how high does it go up? And if you can just tell us a little bit about that, maybe we can focus the conversation a little bit from grade to grade.
Sure. Well, to answer that last question very briefly, the Academy does start in fifth grade. Um, Part of my philosophy with math education is that really in the early grades, it shouldn't be focused on doing a lot of what I refer to as procedural skills. So in those grades, let's just say 2 through 4, they shouldn't be really focused on what often is done, which is spending a lot of time sort of grinding through procedural stuff such as carrying and borrowing and long division, multiplication, a lot of fraction work. Most all of those things in my curriculum, through a Waldorf lens, is really introduced in those earlier grades, but we don't really start practicing it very much until grade 5. So in those early grades, it's just playful, and we encourage homeschool parents or people that are in an in-person Waldorf school, for instance, to really just be playful with the kids. And that's grades 1 through 4. And then in grade 5, we start to say, okay, we've been introduced to a few of these things, such as fractions, long multiplication, long division. Now let's really, gently, not to torture the poor student, but to make it still playful. But okay, let's practice a little bit more of those skills in grades 5 and 6. So that's really when it begins. I did want to reflect on, something else that you said, and I've just been thinking a lot after my travels. I left my Waldorf school, my in-person Waldorf school in Boulder, Colorado. Shining Mountain is the name. I left there in 2017 and decided to travel, and that was really eye-opening for me. And so at this point, I've given math workshops to Waldorf teachers in 22 different countries. I've been very fortunate to do that, and I may have mentioned this in a previous podcast, but just this eye-opening experience that, wow, I do feel that here in the U.S. that we have so much more freedom that is typical in most any other country. Especially Western countries, they tend to still be locked into this educational model that's really, I think the essence of it is really very outdated. It's something that to some degree was designed for preparing factory workers, obedient employees, if you will, and it really
Right.
wasn't geared to what's needed today, and that is creativity. And so this possibility of creativity isn't going to come through a standardized curriculum. It's not going to come through sort of high stakes testing and that sort of thing that's happening more and more in this country. But it's so completely dominant in other Western countries. And in the U.S., we do have the possibility, I think, through the freedom that we have, the ability for, in many situations, certainly for homeschoolers, we've got this incredible opportunity to design a curriculum that's really going to meet our own child and to really cultivate creativity in a way that I think is very exciting. And so, that's what my Math Academy is largely geared around, is this idea of supporting that effort of homeschool parents to, try to create a math curriculum to try to help to develop the student's thinking in the right way, but very much geared towards that one student.
Well, let me peel back two things. Two things came to mind as you were talking. The first one was that you're talking about creativity and how creativity is important. I'm assuming some of it is how you can creatively teach math, but also just how to have creativity in the act of doing math might be something you can tell me a little bit more about.
Yeah, I mean this whole idea, creativity in mathematics, I think for most people that sounds quite foreign. And I think we did speak earlier about this idea, and it's a radical thought that math is an art, right? That math is an art. And, it doesn't mean that all aspects of the math classroom would be artistic or creative, because certainly there is a balance, and there should be a balance between doing skills work and then that creative aspect. But I think what I'm advocating for is a little bit radical, because usually it's all skills. And so to carve out time to really allow for puzzles and problem solving and all of that sort of thing. And that's what really brings that about. I mean, if we really ask, what is creativity? It's really, it's being immersed. It's creating this vessel, if you will, of opportunity where a student is actually kind of guiding their own path, right? There's almost like a little bit of a destiny thing there. It's like, which way should I go? And so that creativity comes from the student ultimately making a decision, and what path should I take? And, to some degree, and it's more complicated than this, but it's an analogy that I think is somewhat useful. You can imagine being in a labyrinth or a maze, and you come upon, constantly you're coming upon choices. I'm coming to a junction. Do I go left or do I go right? Do I take this path or do I take this path? And to some degree in true problem solving, because that's, I think, part of the creative process in mathematics. True problem solving is when you are not sure what route to take. Now, this is completely counterintuitive, or certainly contrary to our normal mathematical experience that you may remember when you were a student, where the teacher said, okay, here's a problem and this is what you do. And so your whole experience as a math student, predominantly is, you're on a homework assignment, you're looking at a homework problem or a test problem, you're trying to recall what you're supposed to do. This is in complete contradiction to the true problem-solving experience, where you're given this situation and you have no idea what to do because you've never seen it before. And so you're trying to figure things out. So in this labyrinth, you may try one path, see where that goes. Well, that didn't work out. You come back, you try something else. Of course, that's kind of a two-dimensional image. And in many ways, problem solving is sort of three-dimensional or n-dimensional. It's just like there are so many possibilities, and you're, to some degree, trying to channel, some higher connection or something that will inspire you. I love this idea of intuition. We spoke about that earlier. This idea of inspiration and intuition, and this idea that suddenly you have this idea that you don't even know where it came from. And that creates this new possibility. So you take that path and that turns out to be something that's really helpful. So I think that is part of the creative process. You think about that, and I know, Mark, you're certainly very steeped in music and music education, and what makes it possible for somebody to create a new piece, a new song. And I think there's something in line with mathematics there. Or as an artist, where did you have an idea when you created this artistic piece to do this particular thing? And so I think that's what, certainly I'm advocating for, and other math teachers in the world. There are many, it may not be the majority for sure, but who realize that we need to awaken this creative possibility in mathematics. And this is, in many ways, this is the ultimate place where the human being is creative. I think is through thinking. Ultimately, there's a thought process, I think, and again, I'm not an artist, or maybe some people listen to that and say everyone's an artist. Okay, but I don't think of myself in that way. But I think there is this, with all of these different aspects of human creativity, there's an element of the freedom of thinking that really that is engaged there, that I think makes mathematics and any artistic activity really exciting.
That's true, and it's also very similar. I love the labyrinth metaphor because it does a couple of different things. It says that there are choices in where you're going, and that part of arriving at that choice is you have to be thoughtful. But also, I like the word creative because you are to create something, to make something, whether it's to make something of your life, whether it's to make a piece of art, whether it's to make a decision. You have authorship. So it gives agency to young minds that say, well, I can produce the answer. And the answer, although has a value, a mathematical value, not all math is something adding up dividing or subtracting to something. And I think that's the vision that young kids have. And as you get deeper into problem solving and you realize that, well, the future of all of us is AI in some way. And in some way, AI is going to do the work that math used to do. However, you still have to ask the right question to get something valuable out of AI. And I think this is somehow metaphorical or at least allegorical to what you're proposing, which is why it's so of this time, Jamie. But
Yeah, it really is. And it is curious. I mean, we could go down this whole road about talking about AI, and I'm not necessarily an expert in that realm,
right.
But it is a curious thing. Our whole educational system in a way has, I guess, to be really crass and perhaps brutally critical of our educational system has really been training is probably a good word, training these young beings to actually be very robot-like in their existence, to just do these steps, follow this through, and it's really the antithesis of creativity. And with AI, yeah, I think you're right. There are going to be, this is not, in some ways, it's not a new thing. This whole mechanization of human work and mechanization of our whole industrial world, et cetera, has been happening for more than a century. And so this is just, in a way, kind of the next step. What is the next thing that, the world of technology can replace, human work with? But it's still this need to have true human thinking, which ultimately is creative. And I know some people may disagree with this, but it will never be able to be done by a machine. So there's this whole extra element of true human thinking, which I would argue, and that's perhaps debatable as well, has this whole spiritual element to it that a machine cannot have. And so that's really what's needed. And education is changing. The needs of our world are changing quickly. And I think absolutely more than ever, creativity is what's needed in true thinking. How do we develop true higher level thinking, not just imitative thinking? That's really what's needed. And mathematics is one of the ways to do this.
Yeah, I see that in your course as well. I remember a few moments ago I said there were two things that came to mind. The other one was, this antiquated model of teaching, this one teacher to many students. In some cases, it could be a class of 10, it could be a class of 30, it could be a class of 40, but it's still one to many. And that is what's antiquated, because the world today, I think, maybe I'm old-fashioned, maybe I'm a classicist in some way, but I do believe that tutoring is more powerful than lecturing. And what your academy does is it really allows for that tutor relationship to build, even though you're online, and even though you have other ways of mitigating that online quality, you're still honestly tutoring one-to-one. Do you think that there's an impact that you're minimizing by not really highlighting that in your academy?
As you speak, I think what comes to mind for me is that, there is something of a balance here for sure. And so certainly in my academy, and I do feel there's a place for a good lecture where the students are hopefully, in a somewhat interesting and inspirational way, they are encountering new content that's delivered to them, by a lecturer, by hopefully somebody who's a master teacher that they can look at and really understand. So that certainly is, that traditional aspect of education is still important. But I think what you're pointing out, which is true, is that we're just out of balance. The typical educational form is predominantly very passive. It's the teacher is up there, the teacher is delivering all the content, telling the students what to do, and then the student is just imitating that, as I said. And so what I'm advocating for, sure, there's absolutely a time, even there are times where I even tell my students, okay, you need to learn how to do this particular thing, and I'm giving them the steps and helping them, guide them along so they can build up their skill base, which is important for their future math studies, etc. But my whole argument is that Sure, those skills are important, but it's not everything. We need to carve out time to really allow for that, ultimate human creative experience and to engage them in what I keep referring to as real mathematics. And that and part of that is and what makes it difficult, and I think that's partly why, I mean, one could ask, well, why have we been doing it this way? Well, I think that the traditional mathematical model and the traditional educational model, for that matter, has evolved as it has because it's fairly straightforward to replicate. So we can standardize things. Okay. And I mean, I remember that my first job teaching, well before I came to Waldorf Education, I was at a private boarding school in New Hampshire, and it was a fabulous place, and I enjoyed my relationship with the students. But I mean, the curriculum is pretty clear. I was just handed a textbook, and I was just told, get through, this entire textbook. That's what my job was. And it was outlined. It was fed to me as the teacher so that I could feed the students. It was fed to me what the assignments had to be. We are right now. We are on day 58 of the year, and this is the assignment that the students need to have. This is the lesson plan. This is what you need to teach. And everything was really handed to me in that way. And so that is fairly easy to replicate. You can hand that to thousands of teachers. And this is, again, the predominant way that things are done, in many, many countries in this world. Everybody's on the national curriculum in that kind of way. And so it's easy to replicate. It's hard. It's hard to replicate this idea of teaching creatively, so that it's going to be different depending on the teacher, where they're at on day 58. And it's going to be different. I know it's true with me as well. It can be different depending on the group of students, etc. Right? And so what my challenge has been for this Math Academy is, how do we strike that balance? How do we do both? How do we have something that, and I'll be honest, I mean, my curriculum is something that does build, right? And I'm on week number such and such, and this is the topic that we're doing. So there is that part that is very, you could say it is very determined and it's going to be the same from one year to the next. But what's not going to be the same is the whole experience that the students have by engaging in the creative work. And that's through this group work that I have the students do. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm giving them ideas of problems, of puzzles, of discovery exercises that they can engage in. And where they go with that is going to vary. It's going to vary quite a bit depending on the group of students. And so it's really striking that balance. And I love that word balance. And I keep coming back to it again and again in my life, because I think that's also something that's needed for our time.